Requiem aeterna.
Hi there, this is Brent.
And this is Amanda.
We are the Unreliable Narrators.
Here to talk about the strangeness, the mystery, and the wonder of Gene Wolfe's prose.
What is time?
What is memory?
What is a person?
Is this reality?
Where are we?
Do we exist?
Have you ever considered that all your choices were what brought you right here to this very moment?
Episode number 26. Bibliomen, 20 characters waiting for a book. First published by Cheapstreet in 1984, republished in an expanded version by Broken Mirrors Press, October 1995.
We're reaching the home stretch.
Yes, we are. So this episode, we will have the last 3 characters that were originally published in the Cheapstreet edition.
There will be a bonus episode with 2 more characters.
Yes, that expanded edition from Broken Mirrors Press we will record also.
Skeeter Smith.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, this one didn't land for me at all. I don't know what to make of it. I don't even really have notes other than ask Brent what he thinks, because this is not working for me.
I was going to let you carry the burden on this one.
Dang it, we're dropping the ball. And that is probably the right metaphor to use, because this is a baseball story. Also probably a clue as to why it didn't land for either of us, because, sports ball.
Yeah. This one was difficult for me. I guess we'll just start out with a previous Wolfe connection. Smith, he shares the last name with the game warden.
Yes.
From Volkswagen with Wilt Smith.
This is Smith spelled with a Y, which I can't help but read Smythe. Sorry.
Well, there is that. So he was born May 14th, 1969, on the desk of Chick Beale.
Yes.
So right off the bat, we know that something's a little odd.
Yes, unless we've got a woman in labor in the reporter's room, which probably is not the strangest place a child's been born. We're maybe not dealing with a person.
Yeah. And at the end of the paragraph, we get that Skeeter was considered primarily to be an athlete and not a cartoon character.
Yes.
And that's where we get the little turn that this is a sub-creation. This is a comic character.
Yes. So Chick Beale, the sports reporter, is writing and or drawing a character named Skeeter Smith.
So you pronounce that Beale?
I did. I don't know if I should do that or not.
Okay.
Did you just say Beale?
I did.
Okay. It's Beal. Y'all pronounce it however y'all like. How's that?
That works for me.
Okay.
So in the second paragraph,
yes,
he makes the umpire in the same way that it's his boss. So he's drawing out his frustrations with Skeeter acting them out. Their commentary on his workplace.
Yeah, so Skeeter threw the home plate umpire to the ground, sat on his chest, and actually forced him to eat his rule book, which seems to be a layered commentary here. Yes.
After that,
yep,
he wasn't very funny anymore.
Yeah, he was often seen wandering along Rush Street, complaining about his luck, sleeping in L stations, or wriggling under the fence to watch Cubs games in Wrigley Field. Thank you for the pun, Gene.
Yeah. There is Mr. and Mrs. Beale.
Beale.
However we want to say it.
Yep.
So they separate.
Yeah, because his job takes him elsewhere and she would prefer to remain near her parents. Healthy relationship there. Meanwhile, sorry.
Much commentary there.
I'm sorry. I'm not sure which side the blame lays on, but yeah. So then Skeeter gets traded. The rule book incident continued to haunt him, however. And after Beale quarreled with managing editor Rupert Braun, Skeeter ate a rule book himself while taking a penitential shower. So not sure what that's all about, but another conflict between reporter and editor, it seems.
And then we get towards the end, most of his jokes were about teaching the Bat Boy to chew tobacco.
Yes.
The April 3rd, 1978 issue announced in a small box that he would no longer appear.
Yeah, and then the sad paragraph. Beale doubtless knew of it, though he had been absent from his job at the paper for the preceding 3 days. On April 4th at about 1:15 a.m., he left Jeff's stop-and-go roadhouse and was struck and killed by a United Freightways truck on US 19. It was not apparent why he had tried to get across the highway, and several patrons of Jeff's stop-and-go later made "Why did Chick cross the road?" jokes, none of which were as funny as most of the strips. The Emperor, however, published a drawing showing a headstone inscribed Skeeter Smith, rest in peace. It was drawn by Charles Perkins, 20, a journalism intern at the Emperor.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if your subcreation dies, you die?
I don't know. It's not a complete death because we have the intern
Yes.
drawing a small headstone comic, which seems a little sad. The handoff is not much of one. So one thing that this reminded me of, the Peanuts.
Yeah.
Charles
Schulz?
Schulz. So I was reading a biography of him, and it's been a number of years ago. And I'll just flat out say right here, I do not enjoy the Peanuts.
Right.
And I don't find most of them to be that funny. But when I was reading the biography, it clicked for me because most of the stuff that is in the comic strip was actually things that the author was dealing with in his personal life, and he was working it out in the comic strip. One thing that kind of stood out, like the redheaded girl calling Charlie Brown, he had a fan that was a younger fan that was somewhat, I'm not going to use the term obsessed, but she had a
parasocial relationship.
Yeah. And then his wife would get angry that she would call. And then people would notice that, oh, there's a comic about the redheaded girl calling Charlie Brown. And then I guess him not being able to kick the football was just some of the frustrations that were coming out. Now, I don't remember the name of this biography, and I don't even remember finishing the book because honestly, I wasn't that interested in the Peanuts and the book didn't grip me. But I feel a little bit of that reading through here because it is a baseball character that's a sub-creation, so it's a comic, who is dealing with, he's either getting his aggression issues out on his boss, or he's doing things that are a result of other issues going on in his life. I didn't find this a particularly interesting Bibliomen.
I'm with you. I didn't find it particularly interesting. I'm not sure what it is. I think I get what's going on here. An author working out his issues through his creative outlet, the frustration of dealing with this thing I write, will it ever be published? Will anyone appreciate it? That's certainly a resonant theme, but this little vignette didn't. Maybe it's just a combination of a couple of things that I'm not particularly interested in, even if the themes or ideas are interesting. Like you're trying to figure out, okay, no, what's happening here? But then a baseball player and Chicago Cubs, which I know for a fact is a team, but then I'm like, are these all Julius, Georgia Patriots? Is there a commentary here that I'm missing? Is that more obscure? Was that a fake team? I don't know. Is it getting more unreal? I'm just not sure what's happening.
Yeah, I feel bad saying this on air, so to speak, but I did not put the same effort into chasing down leads in this.
So we both did the same thing, which is we'll see if the other person has anything interesting to say about it.
Uh-huh.
So listeners, if anyone has anything interesting to say about it, we'll, I don't know, quote you on Instagram. I don't know. It isn't our first suicide. in Bibliomen.
Yeah.
But we can hope that both Skeeter and Chick rest in peace.
Yes.
And then we can move on to the next story?
I have exhausted everything I want to say.
Okay. All right. The woman who resigned is the next story. When she came to town, no one thought she was anything special. Just a thin woman with dark hair and no makeup. A woman that might have been 25 or 35. She checked into the Big Tree Motel and said she didn't think she'd stay long. Mrs. Collins, who runs the place with her husband, says she doesn't think she had much money. She ate once or twice at the Red Hot Cafe, and then she was gone. About a week later, Joe Benson and Tommy Toll found her clothes at the edge of the woods. The sheriff thought she'd been murdered, and he had been looking for her for a couple of days. All right, so that's kind of a bleak opening.
It is. There are notes in there that remind me of Christmas Inn, just kind of with the folksy, things are a bit down opening.
Right. It also seems like the opening of one of those serial killer podcasts or something. Woman comes to a small town. She checks into the inexpensive motel. She eats at the cafe a couple of times, then she disappears. I've seen her clothes. They're all tied up in a plastic bag in the courthouse with a tag that says Jane Doe. There are panties and a bra, both pink to start with, a pair of faded Wrangler jeans, and a woman's flannel shirt. My favorite line in the whole story: you can tell it's a woman's shirt because there are no pockets.
I called that one out too.
Yeah, prescient commentary here from Mr. Wolfe. Along with graffiti artists, this is something that you wouldn't necessarily expect a Midwestern man to be up on, and yet we've been surprised by him so many times that we're not surprised anymore. Of course he's attentive to the fact that women's clothes don't have pockets. Anyway, back to the tragic story of the disappearing woman. The shoes are canvas with rubber soles about half worn out, the kind of shoes you buy at Kmart. There aren't any stockings. I doubt she wore them. All right, so...
Kmart reference definitely dates the story.
Yes. Also, I grew up wearing those shoes. I believe you could buy them 2 pairs for $3, or maybe it was 2 pairs for $5. We bought them at Kmart. Also, there was a little drugstore in town called King's that had them.
Oh, gosh.
Yes. And
forgotten about King's.
You did? Oh, well, it wasn't the highlight of your life to walk there from your grandmother's house twice a year and buy new pairs of canvas shoes. My feet are on the narrow side, and we had to buy them a size too small because otherwise they'd flop off my feet. So I never wore out the soles of my rubber-soled canvas shoes.
Just the toes?
Just the toes, yeah. I have the physical characteristic of the very long second toe. The first thing, I would get a hole at the very end and my long second toe would pop out, and then I'd continue to wear them for a while until they totally flopped off of my feet. But yes. Anyway.
Kmart. The advertising at the time, it was the blue light special. And they had these little carts. They literally would move them around in the store, and it had a pole with a blue police light on the top. And if you were in the store at a certain time and they turned it on, people would rush over there. And I don't remember what, there was some sort of like, oh, you get 10, 15, 20% off or something.
Oh my.
Yeah. So it's probably been in the late 90s the last time I saw Kmart.
Yeah, I don't remember the last time I saw one.
Yeah, I don't know if they're around anymore. I guess just for listeners that are younger, I think like a Walmart is kind of...
Yeah, that seems to have been the shift. Also, Amazon Basics. If you just need sheets and you don't care if they're crappy sheets, or you just need kitchen towels and they'll get stained, but who really cares because they're very inexpensive, then Amazon Basics.
Yeah. So that's the kind of where we're setting up here. It's the very down on their luck type of person.
Right. Or also I was thinking Diamond Age Matter Compiler, the public Matter compilers that put out very simple, shiny. You can get it. It's just very cheap.
And it has advertisements all over it.
It does. It wasn't till years later that the deer hunter brought in what he'd shot and asked people what it was. Oh my goodness. What?
Yeah, I cringed at that line.
Yes. First of all, hunters, you're supposed to know what you're shooting at. That's like day one of hunter's ed. Or, I don't know, your dad takes you out or your grandpa takes you out to teach you to hunt, and you get smacked on the back of the head if you point that gun at something and you don't know what it is.
You don't use the scope as binoculars.
Absolutely not. You never point a gun at something you're not willing to kill, and you know what's behind what you're pointing your gun at. I'm sorry, I'm very upset about this, but he'd shot something and he didn't know what it was. It wasn't human, you could see that, but it wasn't any kind of animal either. It wasn't much bigger than a child, real thin, with real thin arms and legs and long, long fingers and toes. I'm creeped out. Some people said it was a human, but most people said it wasn't. And when the coroner tested the blood, he said so too. What an excellently ambiguous sentence structure, Mr. Wolfe.
Uh-huh. I was thinking the same thing. Little hints of the shadow children from Fifth Head here.
Yes.
Just with the physical description of this creature.
Yes. Mrs. Collins said she knew what it was, but she wouldn't say. She told me when I talked to her for about an hour, but when she tried to look for the register book to get the name, it had been thrown out. I think she just gave up, Mrs. Collins said. Gave up and went someplace else. I felt like doing that so many times myself. So now here it's clear that, according to Mrs. Collins, this is the woman that disappeared and whose clothing was found, but whose body was never found. Also, interesting phrasing. I think she just gave up. This is where you might expect someone just giving up to go out in the woods and lie down and just take a nap and quit. Not be transformed. Giving up, there's some kind of major transformation going on here. Gave up and went someplace else. I felt like doing that so many times myself. Dark sense of connection there. Yeah. I said the thing that had been shot wasn't a human. But that's what you want, isn't it? Mrs. Collins said. Just to quit the job of being one. Give up on everything and go somewhere far away. Haven't you ever noticed how far away a bird is from us? It'll sing to you, but you can't talk to it. And it doesn't care if you live or die.
So that paragraph there reminds me of the zoanthropes.
Yes.
From Book of the New Sun.
Yeah.
And I have a quote here. You mean the zoanthropes? I've met some. Them, of course, they give up their humanity deliberately. There are others who lose theirs without intending to, often when they think they're enhancing it, or rising to some state higher than that to which they were born. Still others, like the Asicans, have it stripped from them. I thought of Baldanders, plunging from his castle wall into Lake Diturna. Surely these things deserve our sympathy. Animals deserve our sympathy. That is why we of the order care for them. But it isn't murder for a man to kill one. Yeah, so just that idea of willingly wanting to give up what makes you human.
Yes.
And I think that's what Mrs. Collins is saying there with the resignation of the human part.
Yeah, so the giving up isn't the giving up on life. The giving up is the giving up on human life and the commitments and the responsibilities that we have as humans.
Yeah, and the willing giving up of making choices and reverting back to a more instinctual state.
Yeah, so I felt like doing that so many times myself. And then she says to the narrator, but that's what you want, isn't it? Just to quit the job of being one, give up on everything and go somewhere far away. Now, she's just said this is what she wants. Mm-hmm. And now she's reversing it. Well, that's what you want. Haven't you ever noticed how far away a bird is from us? It'll sing to you, but you can't talk to it. And it doesn't care if you live or die. And so it seems like the thing that this woman was giving up, or the thing that Mrs. Collins is identifying with, is the desire to not have to care anymore.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that assessment.
Okay, so the next paragraph describes the things she had left behind, and I think that this list is very interesting. a box of tampons that had never been opened, a lipstick, and an empty compact, and so on. Then they go on to describe what we're going to get to in a moment, but each of these things struck me. It's resonant of the description at the end of The Last Battle, where the 4 Pevensey children have been called back into Narnia, but it's the new transformed heavenly Narnia, if we're going to just go ahead and make the metaphor explicit. And Susan is described as not being there with them because she cares about other things more than Narnia. And this description has caused a lot of controversy, but there's the sense that, so it's lipstick, nylons, and invitations, which is a very similar list here. And my interpretation of what's called the problem of Susan is that she is absorbed by the performance of femininity. So she's mimicking what it is to be grown up. She's very concerned about her appearance and about social status. So not concerned about growing up in the sense of taking on adult responsibilities, but concerned about the sense of the appearance of growing up.
Yeah.
And so this list of items, tampons that had never been opened, a lipstick, and an empty compact, it seems to be resonant in a similar way. They're aspects of femininity. Tampons aren't performative, but they're necessary, but they haven't been opened. There's a lipstick and then the compact. So compact is for face powder and has a little mirror on it, and it's empty. So there's some absent femininity, absent adulthood. This is not necessary, or she's rejecting it in some way. So a woman of 25 to 35 would probably on a regular basis require the box of tampons, but she's purchased them and they either hasn't come around time to use them or they aren't necessary because of something that's changed. And yeah, the empty compact. So I don't know. This is resonant to me.
Okay. The only thing I had there with the reading of it was I was wondering if this was about how sick she was.
Possibly.
So then she didn't need to use the tampons, and then because her nutrition was low, and then the makeup was to cover up maybe how ill she was looking.
Right. So the compact is empty because the face powder has been used to hide her pallor or...
I hadn't tied it back to the Susan problem, but I do think you make a good point there. I agree with your assessment of the Susan problem. My critique of where some people get irritated with the Susan problem is if you can go to the store and purchase off a shelf the products of your femininity, then that's just late stage capitalism. That's not, Lewis isn't talking about what it means to be a woman. It's talking about what it means to be a consumer.
Yeah, and that is often the critique, is that, oh, he banned her from Narnia for growing up, or he was so deeply afraid of femininity that he had to reject any overt femininity in the story.
And that just seems silly to me. Women will be women long after lipstick's gone, just like they were women when we were out on the savannah, you know?
Right, long before lipstick appeared on the scene.
Yeah, so I don't think my interpretation of that rejects what you said. I feel like it actually dovetails nicely there. We do have a similar setup, so I do think you're onto something with Susan here. I didn't draw it. I'm a little irritated that I didn't, but...
You can't know all the things.
That's true.
I think your interpretation of illness, right, it's a very common symptom of malnutrition for a woman to lose her menstrual cycle. That makes a lot of sense. But it also seemed to dovetail to me with her rejection of human life. So if she is starving herself so much that her fertility is gone, or has chemically or surgically altered herself so that that regular sign of her fertility is not an issue, we might be talking about planning to go live in the woods. And so practically, you don't want to have to deal with this. But it also seems just very much to be, she is rejecting what it is that makes her a person, an embodied person.
Yeah. No, I agree with that.
After those items, but there were 2 books, and those interested me. One was Grimm's Fairy Tales with pictures by Arthur Rackham, A beautiful book, but worn and torn like she'd read it 1,000 times. I have this book, and it's a great edition. There are many printings of it, but the Rackham illustrations are wonderful. And that long, thin fingers, if you look at Rackham's fairies, they have stick-like, bony limbs, ethereal, and the illustrations tend to be very beautiful, but elongated fingers are characteristic of his fairies.
Ah.
So that resonates or connects there. Other was a college book, Genetic Engineering Practices.
Well, and there's a name inside the cover, but it was a man's name, and you couldn't read the last name. But I do think that's interesting there because we have fairy tale, and then we have science. There's another story where this woman is on a college campus and there's a genetically engineered unicorn running around. There are shades of that story echoed for me here. But then also, once again, the shadow children in Fifth Head, where there's something mythic about them, but maybe they're modified humans, or maybe they used to be humans, or maybe there's some sort of composite that like humans came out of. We're not really sure, but we seem to be converging here where we have fairy tales and the genetic engineering. That's a good note on the fingers. I did not make that connection there.
You haven't looked at enough Arthur Rackham illustrations.
I have not.
I first encountered his illustrations in a copy of the Ring Cycle, the Rheingold and the Valkyrie. I had a copy of it in the bookstore that I used to own, and I took it home with me and have kept it ever since. And was also, and this is, I'm just showing off now, but also learned eventually that the copy I have is the same edition as the copy C.S. Lewis first read the Ring Cycle in when he was very young. And it's the book he describes when he talks about the discovery of your first friend, the person that you look at and are like, what, you too? And you love the same books and you love the same things about them. And it was that book that he and his friend Arthur Greaves first bonded over. So anyway, I care probably too much about this.
You're right. You are showing off, but I'll allow it.
Just this once.
So we get to what could be the end because it says, and that's all there is to tell, at least so far.
Yes.
She's dead, if that was her, and people have pretty much forgotten about it. A few deer hunters have come back with stories about seeing something in the woods, but deer hunters have always been seeing something in the woods ever since the world began.
That is true in my experience, both as a deer hunter and as a friend of other deer hunters who have exchanged stories.
Yeah. So question, have any of those deer hunters that have seen something, did they open fire on it?
No, because you don't shoot at something if you don't know what it is.
Okay, correct answer.
Thank you.
The only thing is that last night, when I was out in the woods myself, looking, I got turned around and couldn't find my car again. So when I finally hit a road, I went along it to a farmhouse to ask where I was. And a woman there, she had set out a pretty little china bowl of milk with some crackers and stuff crumbled up in it. When I asked her what it was for, she said for the dog, but the dog was inside with her. I don't suppose it means anything, but it makes me wonder.
Dun, dun, dun. All right, Mr. Towell, do you have any specialized knowledge about what those milk and crackers could be connected to?
I could be wrong here, but I'd always grown up hearing you put it out for the fairies.
Exactly. This is, you feed the fae, and then they hopefully won't steal your children or rob your hen house or otherwise destroy your life.
Yeah. And sometimes you have to leave a window or door open because you built a house on their trooping spot.
Yep, and if you keep them locked out, they will break things. Yeah.
Yeah, so this seemed like the character, he gets turned around, which it's easy to do in the woods if you're not familiar with the area, but I feel like that's not where we're going. You get turned around, then find a road and wander off to a farmhouse.
Yeah.
That's the start of almost not every, but that's a trope in fairy stories.
Yeah, and this farmhouse is run by a wise woman. She isn't careless about the fact that the Fae are around. She's leaving out food for them.
Yeah. That ends there. I think it's ambiguous enough, but did this woman who resigned, did she become a Fae? Did she become... I mean, we have a fairy tale book, but then we also have the genetic engineering book. Is she some sort of combination?
Well, I think that if we can claim that Gene Wolfe loved anything, I think we can claim that he loved putting together things that you wouldn't expect and taking that division that you take for granted. And then what does it mean to be a human being? Do we exist? Like, we ask these questions for a reason.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't a genetically modified human being be a fairy? It would maybe be an unconventional path to becoming one, but that's only because we just recently invented genetic engineering and genetic modification. If we didn't have genetic modification, there would have been some mushrooms, a silver bowl, and moonlight filtered through the veil of a dead bride or something. There would be a way to transition, or you could be taken, go lie down in the woods and go sit in a circle with fairy mushrooms around and then be taken and transformed. Although I think if the fairies had been doing it themselves, they would have substituted bog wood in her motel room bed, and then the landlady would have been upset because she would have had to clean up the muddy water. But
yeah,
I liked this transition because it is characteristically Wolfe, but also it's characteristically that thing that I find interesting, which is all of this makes sense together. You think that these are separate modes. You think science fiction and fantasy are two separate genres because you've been looking at one with one eye and one with the other eye, and you haven't employed your binocular vision to see their connection and their interlace.
I like that. I wonder if you'll bring it up in any future Wolfe stories.
Can't imagine where I ever would. Hopefully another story will hit a similar note at some point, and then I can recycle material.
I enjoyed this one.
Me too.
It cast light on some of other Wolfe's stories. I feel like it's a theme that is reoccurring in his work.
Yeah, I liked it too. I think the connections that you drew to Fifth Head and to New Sun, those things make sense. Thematically, this seems, just characteristic Wolfe. This is in the center of his thematic stream.
Yeah. If you have problems with fairies, make sure you put the milk out.
Milk and crackers. Yep. And just be prepared for it to be weirder than you expected. So we have one last character right here at the end of Bibliomen. And this is in the form of a letter. So this is another one. I know I already did this once this episode. So unfortunately, this one clunked for me. And I probably just am missing things. But what you got? It's a letter from a P.O. box in Illinois. The letter signed Gene Wolfe to Mr. Hiroshi Hayakawa, Executive Vice President of Hayakawa Publishing in Tokyo.
So, Hayakawa, actual person.
Oh, that's good.
Yes. So this is if we had subcreation going on
Okay.
before, I think we have a bit of, I don't know if literary forgery or he's pulling real life characters into his stories.
Okay.
So this man, he was an editor for a Japanese, it's SF magazine.
Okay.
There was at least one Wolfe story published in it, but not during the years that he was the editor. So he seems to have been influential in the Japanese science fiction fandom.
And we know, of course, that Book of the New Sun is very popular in Japan.
I failed Japanese in college, so I can't read any of this stuff. Most of the material online about him is in Japanese, and there's only so much that Google Translate can give you. So, appears to be a real person. Wolfe, he uses this trick in some of his other stories where Gene Wolfe, the character, is either translating something, or like in Rattler, where a fictional Gene Wolfe and a fictional Brian, they're the people that overhear the story. This says it's a real letter. I don't think it is, even though there are actual people with these names. So it says, let me tell you a story. A nurse I knew had as a patient a brilliant young man who was dying. And when her duties permitted it, she often sat and talked with him. Day after day, he told her all he would do when he was well at last, how he'd go to the university, travel across the world, walk softly into the dark rooms where the sick cough out their lives. He grew weaker and at last delirious, but in his final moment of clarity, he told the nurse he had spoken to the powers at the edge of the universe, and they had promised he would do all he wished. That night, he died. The next day, as she walked to the hospital, she thought she saw the young man's face on the cover of a new magazine at the kiosk on the corner. When she looked closer, it was not he, not a face at all. And yet, when she glanced over her shoulder as she walked away, she seemed to see him again. Although she is an American, her mother came to our country from Japan. And at that moment, she said a word in Japanese for which we have no equivalent in English. I am told it means 10,000 years. Faithfully, Gene Wolfe.
Okay.
Couple of things. I think what she says is bonsai, which is long life, long live the emperor, may it be 10,000 years.
And all this time I thought it was just a little tree.
Well, yeah.
Okay.
I think that's what it is. I could be wrong. There's a kind of a joke in here where it's like, oh, she thought she saw his face. Well, she's also Japanese, so she's not just mistaken somebody else's face for his. And then the powers at the edge of the universe promised that he would do all those things he wished. There's another Wolfe story, short story, where he's hearing somebody else talk about how when they went to see, I believe it's their dying mother at the hospital, they saw another version of themselves sitting there in the waiting room. And I think he's playing around with the same material there, where somehow this young man, even though he died, he's still alive. And it's a weird way that he's coming back to tell the person who was caring for him that he's still alive, because she's seeing his face, not in other people's faces, but in
Objects.
Objects.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he gets to come back in some way or continue on in some way. I'm just not sure how this connects to...
That I'm not certain, because the only thing I would say there is she thought it was the cover of a new magazine that was his face.
Yeah, that's as close as we got to paper here.
Yeah, so the books would be the objects that she saw his face in.
Yeah, and maybe that's how he gets to enter books or magazines, travel across the world, go to the university via books. I don't know. This is why I'm like, okay, I think I get what happened here. I just am not sure thematically how it connects. So that's all. That's where I am.
I could be reaching here because there's the powers.
Reach away because I got nothing.
Okay. Well, there's the powers at the edge of the universe.
Yes.
And so Wolfe has toyed with this before. So if the edge of the universe and space and time are part of the structure of the universe, when you leave the universe, you are outside our time And so if you have beings that are outside our time saying that you'll do these things, and there seems to be an invitation there of him coming out of our time and going into theirs. And so in one sense, it's a bit of a invitation to heaven, but in a different context. And so I think that Bonsai, he's still alive. It says here, translated, means 10,000 years. We don't think that's a literal 10,000 years. I just think it means
A long time.
a long time.
Yeah.
And perhaps it has a meaning more like an agelessness or of an age.
Right.
So.
Okay. I think I can go along with that. I didn't have anything better. So.
Yeah, I don't know. This is one of those, at least the Cheapstreet edition ends with a, I don't even know what you'd want to call this. Instead of sub-creation, it's super creation.
Yeah, it's definitely unexpected and playful. I'm just not sure of the move that Wolfe is making here. Again, there's probably some obvious interpretation that I'm just missing, but.
Well, I think the move is that if there are aspects of sub-creation, what he has done here is that he's taken two people who are in the real world, and they're the subject of a fictional piece, even though it says that this is a real letter. I think it's a fictional letter. So I think it's pointing up that we are, I don't want to use the term fictional, but we are characters that are in stories for these beings who are at the edge of the universe.
Okay.
And as dismissive as I was of Skeeter,
Yes.
I probably shouldn't have been because
you are Skeeter?
Well, no, I'm a being at the edge of the universe to Skeeter.
Okay.
And I would be kind of a jerk god to him, is what it amounts to.
Okay. That's good. Before we get indignant about what the Increate has written into our world, imagine our responsibility the other direction.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think that's where he's going with it. And you've brought up this theme several times before. The one off the top of my head that I'm thinking about is in Why Private War, where you said that you didn't read all the poems that were in the anthology. But what you said is that of the ones that you read, Wolfe was the only one that had a poem that it seemed to be pointing outside of itself.
Right.
And I think ending Bibliomen, at least the original edition, with this letter, this is something that's pointing outside of the collection.
That's good. I like that. Not just because you're repeating a point I've made elsewhere. Yeah, I like that.
There you go. The secret to a good podcast co-host is to agree with everything that was previously said.
Yes. Come back in favorably interpreting an offhand No. Final thoughts. Obviously, we are going to address the 2 additional stories in the Broken Mirrors Press edition in our next episode, but here we've wrapped up the Cheapstreet publication. Final comments.
If I had bought this directly from Cheapstreet back in the day, I don't know what I would have thought of it. The Mary story.
Yes.
I think that one has stood out to me. The AI car.
Yes, that was early on.
That was early on. That one stood out to me. The interview with the police officer. That one's very funny, but that one also recontextualized the whole collection.
Yeah, that was a hinge, I think, that the collection turned on.
There's the guy that was buried inside the book.
Yes.
I found that one enjoyable.
French. Yeah.
Thank you. Some of them just didn't land for me. Skeeter did not.
And Rico.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say Skeeter more so than Rico. Skeeter just didn't.
Yeah, Spinning Jenny didn't really land for me.
No, and I put a lot of effort into trying to understand that one.
Yeah.
I don't know if I helped or made it worse.
Yeah. So as a collection, like you said, I don't know what I would think if I had gotten it from Cheapstreet and been like, let me read this book. Coming to it many years later, already a convinced fan of Gene Wolfe and having read his novels and a lot of his short stories and various nonfiction pieces. And so having a sense of who he is, I feel like there's a lot to play with, to unpack, to enjoy here. I did like that moment of reading the story about with the interview with the police officer, like you said, and realizing, oh, I've been reading this as a disconnected series of vignettes and characters. This is a coherent whole, I think, in some complex and interesting way. So there are two things I like about it. They all seem to be characters who exist in a fully realized world, even though there are 20 characters waiting for a book. They seem to be whole characters and whole persons, which I think is very Wolfe. Everything is a 4-dimensional or maybe 11-dimensional being. We might only see a little bit of it, but they're fully realized. And then also, and this is just very tactile and sensorial, especially for a podcast, is it's a great book in the publication sense. It is a very well made. The paper is lovely. The illustrations are economical and interesting. The printing was just excellently done. It's a beautiful book to handle.
Mm-hmm.
It's a beautiful book to see, and reading in it is actually just a visceral pleasure. Maybe that's just because this is the kind of thing I really enjoy. But so what does that do to the book? They took these little short stories, very short stories. Wolfe wove them together into a complex, though not entirely coherent whole. And then the publisher turned it into a beautiful object that is giving you library with leather chairs and some good scotch and a nice low fire in the fireplace feeling. Like you should probably have a smoking jacket on and be comfortably curled up and probably a hound or two next to the fireplace. It's a complete aesthetic experience.
I know that the listeners can't hear this, but I was nodding my head.
Yes, he was. Is this just because you have a good smoking jacket?
No, I do have a smoking cap, though.
Interesting. Have you ever smoked?
I never have smoked.
Interesting. Accessories, but no experience. Wait, did you actually just say on the podcast that you've never smoked? You are such a liar.
That's true. I quit smoking over 40 years ago.
For those of you following along at home, that means he started smoking when he was about 2.5 or 3 years old.
It lasted a day.
Did you steal your dad's cigarettes?
No.
Your grandpa's cigarettes?
No, I wanted to go outside when my dad and grandpa were smoking on the porch, and my mom's like, well, that's only for smokers. It's like, I can smoke. So
that does sound like little Brent.
Yeah, she made me go out and smoke a cigarette.
Did you throw up?
No, I didn't. I did not enjoy it, but
yeah, I can't imagine that you would.
Yeah, looking back on it, that seems like a risky
parenting move.
Yeah.
I don't think you get addicted to nicotine the first puff, but we'll hope not anyway. All right. Any other comments or?
No, one thing, this letter doesn't have an illustration on it.
Oh, that is interesting.
All the other short stories, they have a little medallion-sized illustration with them. But this one doesn't. But I think it's in keeping with the exit sign out, which then just adds, if this is a forgery in the Peace universe, then it's like, wait, what? Layers.
All right. We'll find out if there's more to the Broken Mirrors press edition next time. The Unreliable Narrators are Amanda Patchen and Brent Towell. And, as Gene Wolfe said, we are as solid as most truly false things are, a dance of particles in space. Only the things no one can touch are true.